Hello once more. Fix the frequencies of your brainwaves to hear the vibes of the universe. Just like before, I will begin this movie with recent activities of Earth's magnetic field. First, let's look at a perfect example of typical geomagnetic storm caused by the influence of Sun. Storm started in the night of February 17th and finished just after midnight next day. According to Space Weather Prediction Center, KP index reached 5 points. Storm was caused by the impact of coronal hole frontal density wave and a sudden flip of IMF orientation to the south. BZ component fell under -10 nanoteslas, while spike on plasma density chart exceeded 100 particles per cubic centimeter. Bigger problem is the fact that one day earlier density spikes were even bigger, and the PZ magnetic component reached almost the same value as 24 hours later. As you can see, the biggest density spike was recorded by ACE before 17 February. According to GOES readings, both events affected the geomagnetic field in similar way. However, on the ground, geomagnetic disturbances were much stronger during the second event. As in Canada, so in Europe, because just like most of typical space weather activities, this event affected the magnetic field over bigger part of the planet. It seems that CCMC decided to decrease by half value of density spike recorded originally by ACE satellite. Instead of 140, we can see here 70 units. Second graph from bottom shows that the impact of dense solar wind affected mostly the BY magnetic component. This is probably why the disturbances of geomagnetic field were much weaker than one day later. But even if the density of spike was seriously reduced, its impact on the magnetosphere is still quite spectacular. Even if the response of geomagnetic field wasn't too strong, impact managed to cause visible auroras over night sky in Kiruna. But they were not even half as strong as during the next night. Now, let's compare it with the disturbances which were caused by one of the daily geomagnetic jolts on 20th of February, almost exactly at 22 UTC. Although the jolt wasn't too strong and reduced the magnitude of local magnetic field by around 250 nanoteslas, K index was elevated to 6. I think that it might be caused by the outburst of auroras. Even if they were not that strong as during the previous geomagnetic storm, they were easy to see. Of course, like most of those daily jolts, it was a local event and it didn't affect the magnetometers in Canada. But a disturbance which was similar to the one in Europe was recorded there a couple hours later, at 3 UTC on the next day. Like always, the KP index remained low, so according to SWPC there wasn't any geomagnetic activities during this period of time. Those poor guys are always confused when they can't see any possible explanation on ACE solar wind readings. This small shift of IMF magnetic orientation is everything what happened at this time, and it can't be rather blamed for the auroras in Northern Europe. Although there wasn't too many activities on most of monitors from ISWA, I found something interesting on the SWMF plus RCM ionospheric polar cap potential, where just before 22 UTC we can see a sudden increase of negative potential over Scandinavia. Notice that its value was pretty high at this time, minus 34 kilovolts. Now I would like to show you something what caught my attention. On 22 February, ACE satellite recorded something what didn't look like anything what could be connected with solar activity. First, there was one of the biggest spikes which I ever seen. Density reached almost 200 particles per cubic centimeter. But it wasn't so much odd, as those spikes, although smaller, appear mostly couple hours before an impact of fast solar wind from coronal hole stream. Problem is that instead to grow, velocity made a sudden drop just after the spike and fell almost to 300 km per second. Here it is visible better. I hope that I don't need to tell that this is against all known rules of space weather models. Thankfully, CCMC didn't try to censor the data, and we can look at the impact of density spike on both SWMF magnetosphere monitors. However, there is a small difference between them, as for the time of arrival. On SWMF plus RCM simulation, spike came after half hour of delay, compared to the older version. I'm not 100% sure, but one of the Canadian ground magnetometer stations recorded some disturbances which could be caused by this event. To finish nicely with the space weather, I would like to tell about another interesting event from last couple days. It seems that on most of readings, there is a hole in the data from the night between 25th and 26th of February. Data gap can be seen as on ACE, so on GOES graphs. But it isn't as important as the fact that during this time Magnetosphere went through a serious discharge. This time, together with the current rings, Van Allen belt lost all energetic particles as well. During this time, we can see some interesting readings recorded by all 5 Themis satellites. Those which orbit our planet felt it much stronger. On the Van Allen satellite's readings, things are even more interesting. I've marked the time of ACE and GOES missing data with arrows. It seems that both crafts recorded some interesting blob-like feature made of oxygen ions right in the middle of this time frame. But on the recordings from probe B it is visible better. VA probe A, however, recorded nicely the loss of high energy electrons. Right in the midnight between 25 and 26 February, density of low energy protons made an extreme jump from dark blue to bright green. I can't tell you if it is just an error. Time to leave the space for a while and deal with more earthly aspects of the universe in which we exist. I mean, of course, the atmosphere and weather patterns. Not so long ago, I've spent quite a lot of time to connect the behavior of air currents with the geomagnetic field and its changes. Somehow I felt that I should discuss the weather anomalies which were visible at this time close to Australia, and something in my subconsciousness told me that it is very important. I've thought that those changes can be crucial for the entire planet. I wasn't wrong that much. Couple days after this statement, two low-pressure systems appeared south and southeast from the smallest continent, and tropical storms started to form quickly. In the night between 19th and 20th February, both storms, which turned into powerful cyclones, hit the shores. Storm called Marcia landed in Queensland and started to move along the coastline. It was estimated that just before the landfall, storm reached Category 5. Second cyclone, called Lem, which hit the northern parts of Australia, was slightly weaker. But in the difference to its stronger twin brother, Lem managed to survive quite a long time deep within the continent. It was the first time in recorded history that two such strong tropical storms appeared so close to each other and made an almost simultaneous landfall. Although both cyclones disappeared couple days ago, it seems that they managed to affect the natural weather patterns in a serious way. Colors on those satellite images represent the heights of cloud tops. The brighter is the spot, the higher the cloud is reaching. As you can see, clouds over Australia are placed pretty high. Notice what happened when an open field line from the polar cap managed to establish a connection with the landmass. Because the temperature is getting lower, the higher above the surface we move, cloud tops over this area are as well extremely cold, around -80 degrees Celsius. Water vapor, which is the main component of clouds, is being cooled down rapidly, what turns it into liquid water. This is causing all those heavy rainfalls. And now I will make a small forecast using my theory of electromagnetic atmosphere. I need to warn you that there won't be too much of sunshine in my doomsday weather show. At the time when I'm recording this movie, there are 3 visible flux tubes which are connecting southern polar cap with equatorial belt. Magnetic tentacle, marked with yellow outline, is clearly bigger than the rest. It grew so fat because it's the same open field line which devoured Cyclone Lem. Let's look at the animation. In my guess, flux tube in the middle will very soon change its connection point from Queensland to Fiji Islands, where the fat yellow field line is connected right now. This will probably cause some kind of discharge, and there is a possibility that another tropical storm will form there. At the same time, cold and wet air masses, which cover bigger part of Australia, will snap to the green field line on the left side. This process began already, and will finish before I will publish this movie. Maybe this world is a little bit unfair, but it seems that changes are taking place differently in different parts of the globe. Personally, I can't complain about the current weather. In Poland, you can feel already spring in the air. Last days were here warm and sunny. But at the same time, couple thousand kilometers to the southeast, people are struggling with snowstorms and avalanches. In Palestine, many people died because their tents fell under the weight of snow. In Israel and Afghanistan, it isn't better. If you wonder how such situation is possible at all, look here. Another example of magnetic reconnection in the atmosphere. Each time when such reconnection takes place, a separate low air pressure system is being formed. Another thing worth to notice is that spectacular emission of ionized clouds in Spain. One day earlier there was an unusual quake in this area, which was reported by many people. But look how those atmospheric reconnections affect the temperature over northern hemisphere. Cold polar air masses are visibly displaced. Here we can see nicely that the polar vortex divides itself into two separate air masses. One is placed over Northern America, while second is moving towards Northwest Asia. But even if the size of atmospheric flux tubes grew in last couple days, still the biggest and strongest of them connect themselves to the Southern America. Keep in mind that not all effects of electromagnetic influence are so obvious. For example, this giant flux tube which connected Gulf of Mexico with Europe didn't affect the cloud layer so strong as other field lines, but it can be seen clearly on mimic water vapor soundings. And this is the time to show you my new discovery, detailed total electron content map of Southern America, which in the difference to ionospheric monitors from ISWA is based on actual readings from radars. I think that this explains in big part why all those magnetic tentacles appear so often in this region. Most recent animation shows some very interesting disturbances, which could be caused by the latest geomagnetic storm from the last day of February. It looks like some kind of electron jet. Now take a closer look at the air mass which emerged from the equatorial belt somewhere in the middle of Pacific and started to flow directly to the north. This is not a good sign, as it means that the air circulation starts to turn into wrong direction. Here we can see that the perpendicular motion of water vapor made already a huge gap in our natural equator. If the flux tube will manage to connect to the polar cap, water vapor will start to flow here in north-south orientation. Of course, big part of those disturbances can be explained using couple ionospheric monitors like HMF2. However, it is pretty hard as things are happening there extremely fast, and sometimes our ionosphere looks like a Swiss cheese or a victim of Russian mafia. Before I will finish this episode, I want to speak about the recent space weather activities. It seems that in the beginning of March we can't complain for the lack of interesting events. During last couple days we've had 2 G1 geomagnetic storms and both were caused by coronal hole streams. According to ACE data, both streams were negatively polarized and pretty fast. Second fast solar wind impact raised the velocity almost to 700 km per second. Look how those streams disrupted the proton surge, which was caused by solar activity during previous days. However, there seems to be a small difference in time frames between Northern America and Europe. And again, typical space weather events were followed by a local geomagnetic jolt, which was recorded only in Europe, although it was only slightly weaker from the global disturbances and raised the K-index in Kiruna to 6. Just like before, you won't find any possible explanation on ACE graphs. Just as you won't see any activity on official KP index from SWPC. For the end, I would like to show you the most recent information regarding the Earth orientation. In the difference to magnetic polarity, this plot shows the coordinates of celestial pole and its movement since the beginning of year 2015. As you can probably see, around January 26th, polar motion made a sudden turn and started to follow a different path. Although its current displacement isn't too big, celestial pole never behaved like this since we started to track its position. If we look at older data, we will notice that all the time before 2015, celestial pole was making circles. But in last month, it started to move along an almost straight line. Hard to tell how the situation will develop in the near future, but something in my gut tells me that it might be connected with the displacement and deformation of polar vortex. And this is all for today. Sorry that you've had to wait so long for this movie. Hopefully next one will be finished earlier. Class dismissed. Be safe. Peace.